There are a large number of browser object model and document object model events and properties. So we're going to take a look at some of them in more detail, but I did provide a link to a comprehensive listing because there's such a large number of these. So you can see that we have mouse events and keyboard events and form events and drag events and clipboard events, and it just goes on and on and on. And then I did try to provide some links to W3 schools so you could actually see more about an event if you were interested in it. Okay, so that is an extensive list. And you may actually find that useful when you start working on your final project. So I would kind of keep some of these in mind, especially if you are creating games. Some of these events do come in handy. And we're going to take a look at some of the browser object model properties and events, and then we'll take another look at some of the document object model events and properties. So we'll start with the browser object. So we have a window object. This represents the browser's window. Properties of the window would be history, frames, location, navigator, screen, and documents. So this is the BOM. Remember, the document object model is a subset. All global JavaScript objects and functions and variables become properties of the window object. Document is a property of the window object as well. So we could code window.document.getElementById, but it's assuming window, which is why we just use document.getElementById. We used set interval and clear interval in our last assignment, so you should be familiar with those. If it was fuzzy to you how they worked, you can take another look here. And for this one, the code basically sets this timer, and it updates the timer on the interval. And then if we want to stop the time, we can click here on stop time, and that's where it's going to clear out the interval. Okay, and this is basically what we did with the unicycle. So you guys are familiar with this already. This is just another way it can be applied. Set timeout and clear timeout is kind of similar in concept to the set interval and the clear interval. The difference is the set timeout calls a function after a specified number of seconds, and it only executes once. Set interval keeps repeating. It executes over and over and over again. Clear timeout clears the timer. And so how you would use this is that you would probably call set timeout and give the option to clear it before it executes. Okay? Clear timeout is only useful if you use it before set timeout runs, because it only runs once. So, if it runs and then you try to use clear timeout, it's not going to be very useful because it's already run. So I have a little example here. And you can see here that we've got a date that we want to display. So we have set timeout. We got a little anonymous function here. We're calling today, and that's after whatever, 1,000 milliseconds, which is probably like a second. And then if we decide that we don't want the date to display, we can clear it out. So here's our example. Display the date and stop the date. So if we click on display the date and we wait a full 5 seconds, there's going to be a pop-up with the date displaying. Okay? If we click on display the date and immediately we choose to stop it, the pop-up will never display. Okay, so if we do this and we hit that right away, I mean, we could sit here for an hour and it won't display. Now, if we hit display date and we don't do anything, we wait 5 seconds, then the pop-up should display. So now at this point, if I click stop the pop-up, it's not going to do any good because it's already showing. Okay, and the code for that is right here. It's not very complicated. We got 2 different buttons with different IDs, and then we're using the IDs with the event listeners. And then we've got a little anonymous function here. So we've just got set timeout, and here I've got an alert in the anonymous function that's going to display the date. And here we have a clear timeout, and we're clearing date pop-up. So it is very similar to what we did with set interval. The only difference is set timeout executes once. Print. So this is window.print. It opens the print dialog box to print the contents of the window. Pretty easy to code. Okay, so it's just document.getElements by ID. And so your ID that you have here is typically associated with a button. You know, if you're going to have them click the button to print, or you could have them click in a paragraph or some other identifier. So you do have to have the ID for that. Add event listener, listening for a click. And then we have the anonymous function. Okay, and this is the entire function code here. And it's a one-line function. It's basically calling window.print. And if I click that, you'll see it goes right into print. Window.open is the purpose is to open a brand new window. And so you have to give it a URL and a name. The specs are all of these attributes. So is it going to be full screen? What is the pixel dimension for height and width? What is the pixel positioning for the left position? Do you want to display the address bar? Do you want to display the menu bar? Do you want it resizable? And for all of these yes or no things, you can use yes or no. You can also use the binary equivalent, which is 1 or 0. Okay, so you have all of these options that you can turn on, and that would be in the location of specs. Okay, and so here's a little example. So I don't really have a URL. I'm going to call it my window, and these are the dimensions. Now, you should give it a name, and that would be here. If you give it a name, then you can target it and close it. If you don't give it a name, it's just going to be open and the user has to manually close it. So if we give it a name like this, then we can use window.close. Okay, so if we open my window here, then we can use my window.close to close it. So if we don't give it a name, we can't close it. We got window move to and move by. They are both used to reposition the current window. Move to uses a top and a left value. So it's more of an absolute location. And move by uses a relative location. So it's where do you want the window to go relative to its current position. Whereas move to, it's just looking at the top and the left. So if you use move to, You have to give it an X and a Y coordinate. Move by, you do the same thing, but move by is looking at the current location and making the adjustment from there. Window resize will resize the current window to whatever you tell it the height and width should be. So here we have a window that's opening up with a height and width of 100. And here we are changing it to resize. And you'll notice that it is using the My Window name here. My Window.focus activates that particular window because, as you know, you can have multiple windows open, and if the focus is on a window, it activates the window. So we can take a look at a little example here. So here's create a new window. Woohoo, this is my window. And I've given it a name, so I can click on close new window. And let's have the new window up here. Let's change the dimensions, and I'll make it 500. Or I will hopefully make it 500. We'll do 500 by 800. And we'll resize. Okay, let me move that, and I'll close it. Okay, and if you want to see the code for all of this, okay, you can see all of it is down here in the script section. And I'm strictly using event listeners and event handlers for all of this. Okay, this is an anonymous function. Here we've got another anonymous function. And up here where we're creating, we also have an anonymous function. Window object properties. So you can modify the whether it's closed, the default status, I believe that should be inner height. I will fix that. The I is missing. Inner width, location, name, navigator, outer width, outer height. Sometimes if you're playing games, these widths and heights matter. Okay, so if you want more information on those, I do have a link here to W3 Schools. I also created an example. Okay, that basically just shows you what I'm looking at is 896 for the height, the width of 1920. And if I kind of pull this down and I resize it and I reload it, you'll notice that some of these things have changed. Okay, it only grabs the values when it first loads. So if you resize, okay, it will recalculate. Okay, so now I've added the scroll, and if I even make it smaller here, okay, now I'm getting vertical and horizontal because I resized it. For your window screen object, this is information about the user screen. Again, when you get into developing games, this may be something that you might want to know. I do have an example accessing screen information. So I can click on the button and it shows me the screen information, and then I can also reset. The history object keeps track of all of the pages that you have visited. And there are a couple different methods. There is a length property that'll show you how long it is, but there is a history back, which loads the previous URL, history forward. So if you remember, the history is a list. And so you click on the back and you click on the forward button. During your current session, you can have a lot of pages that are back, quite a few that are forward. So from where you're at right now, window history forward will take you forward to pages that you've previously visited. Window.history go, you can tell it specifically what page you want to go to or how many backwards and forwards. So if you put negative numbers in here, it is going to go backwards. The location object shows information about the current URL. So who's the host? What is the hypertext reference? What is the path name? What is the port? What is the protocol? All of that kind of information. Location.assign would actually let you load a new document. Reload will reload the current one, and replace will take the current document and it'll actually stick that in the history list and remove a specified URL. So I do have an example with this as well. So if we get the URL information, this is the current information of the page we are looking at. And then if I navigate to NMC, let me click back here. Let me reload, get URL, and if I replace, it's taken us to our 190 website. And now you'll notice that I can't click on back. Okay, and so if I wanted to go back in that page, I have to access from here. Okay, so it's just an example of how those different commands work. The window navigator object. This is information about the browser that you are in. It'll tell you what version you are in and if the cookies are enabled. And you can see it's got the platform, language, whether Java is enabled or not. And if I click on that, this is all of the navigator information. The engine name of the browser is Gecko. The engine name is kind of interesting because when we switch from like a major version of HTML, CSS, when we go up a major version, typically whether the browser can handle it or not depends on the engine it is using. Okay, so browsers that are using the same engine typically can handle new code at the same time. Kind of an interesting side note. So we just went through quite a few browser object methods and properties, and you will get a chance to practice some of those in the assignment.